Thank you for joining us today in this breakout session about 4 principles to build remote employee engagement. For those of you that are in this breakout session, if you are comfortable and able, I invite you to turn on your camera. We're hoping to, in a session about employee engagement, we're hoping to have a little engagement in this breakout room, or sorry, in this breakout session. We will do a breakout room because there's only a couple people. We'll have to see how that will work exactly. But nonetheless, here we are. So my name is Burke Wallace. I'm the Executive Director of Academics for IEM Charter Schools. That is, I oversee a group of 3 independent study charter schools. So we are non-site-based, non-classroom-based schools. Our students have been working from home for decades. And so we have had many years to practice working in a remote environment. And so the goal of this is hopefully to share with you some principles that we have learned and gleaned from our time working in a remote environment. So you see here on the screen the presentation, what we'll be covering. Those bullets number 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are the 4 principles that we will be talking about: building relationships of trust, building a culture of consistency, building two-way communication, and building an attitude of a lifelong learner. And then if there's time at the end, we will have some takeaway strategies. But before we do that, I have a poll that I want to share with you all. And let me put it on the screen. All right. So if you could fill out this poll, and the question is, and this is your staff. So whether you are a teacher or an administrator or work at the County Office of Education, how engaged is your staff? Do you think overall, and even if you're a staff member, that's okay. Very engaged, somewhat neutral, somewhat disengaged, or very disengaged? All right, a couple more seconds for people to fill out their choices. Hi, Jean, nice to see you. All right, so let me end the polling and share this with you. So you can see from this that a majority of those on this breakout session, you feel like your staff, whether you are a staff member or a school leader, is somewhat engaged. And one of you very disengaged. And so I hope that through this, you can learn some principles to take away, not only to support where you're at, but I think there's also applicability for how we work with students. And so hopefully you as educators can see that. All right, I'll stop sharing the results. All right, so the first principle that we talk about is building relationships of trust, because hopefully we can all be in agreement that working remotely or in an online environment is different than being able to see everyone in the office or at the school building on a daily or on a regular basis. And so there's certain things that you really have to be intentional with, and one of those is building a relationship of trust. So when we did some research on what are characteristics of trust, you see on the screen some of the things that we came up with. Okay, so what I'd like while I'm talking about this screen, in the chat box, if you would, I would like you, here's the question. When you think of someone you trust, what characteristics or qualities does that person have? So if you could type in the chat box, what are some characteristics or qualities of a person that you trust? And so you see on the screen some that I was able to research. And so one way that we do that is by trying to demonstrate and lead with those characteristics, but also through intentional activities such as some of the community building that is listed on the screen. Okay, we are intentional with staff recognition, with even though we're remote, with knowing that our staff are doing a good job and honoring them and recognizing them with that. We also, on a monthly basis, have a staff town hall where we highlight employees' non-work related areas of expertise. So for example, one of our teachers who lives on the peninsula She is the Nobel laureate of one of the cities on the peninsula. And so at one of our town halls, she shared some of her poetry. Or at one of the town halls, I started out in education as a football coach. And so I led the staff through a quick little 15-minute mobility flow and encouraged people to turn on their cameras. And so these are just sort of fun ways that we can connect with people and get to know them outside of their work capacity, which would happen anyways in a classroom or in a school or in an office building. We also think in order to build trust, you also have to be available. And so because we are a fully remote workforce, we have monthly chats our supervisors do with their teachers that they supervise, or that I as a director would with those that I supervise. I mentioned the town hall meetings where our staff are free to ask any Q&A. They know that we have that culture in our schools. And this year we've actually started offering Zoom office hours where staff, and sometimes they're even appropriate for parents, can drop in and chat with a director or a supervisor. And so these are ways that we build trust by making ourselves accessible. All right, so let me pull up the chat box real quick because I saw a couple chats there. Oh, thank you, Angela, for putting that question in there. All right, so consistency. You trust someone is consistent, someone's open-minded, good listener, empathetic. Thank you. Those are all great examples. All right, so this is just an example, and I'm actually going to put us in a breakout room here in just a moment. But this is an example of some of the activities that we have done at our schools in a remote workplace for engagement. So one of them you see was a paint night. So this one took a bit more coordination. We had to actually order the supplies. They had to sign up ahead of time. They got shipped to their house. And then we all did one of those sort of, a wine and paint, if you will. And so people were able to do that at home. We also did a a happy hour with our staff after right at 5 o'clock when the workday was over. And so that was fun. And we had some breakout rooms and asked questions. And then this one, in the bottom right-hand corner, was a family event. And so we had a virtual campfire. And so we had like campfire backgrounds on our Zoom screens, and the kids were invited and people were encouraged to bring their own s'mores activities. So basically as a staff, those who attended, it was optional, of course, ate a bunch of sugar and laughed together. And so that really helped us to build trust and engagement. And then in the top right corner there, you see that mobility flow workout. That's some of the school leaders that I was talking about. All right, so I'm going to place this in a breakout room. And Angela, if you could type this in. I'd like us to discuss activities that your school does for engagement, for employee engagement. Okay, and again, whether you're a teacher, you can answer this. And if it's nothing, that's okay. But we're hoping that through the collective wisdom of those on this call, that we can learn some things. So let me set up the breakout rooms. Okay, so again, I will put you in there. And the question is, what activities does your school or your work do for engagement? I'll give you about 1 minute to 90 seconds in this. So hopefully everyone will have a chance to share. Well, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, can I get a thumbs up? Was that helpful? Were you able to share some ideas? Good. Excellent. Yeah, there's no magic bullets with this kind of stuff, and it's not rocket science, as I like to say about most things, except for LCAP, right, Angela? That one takes rocket science sometimes. But yeah, so it's just important for a school culture to have these employee engagement experiences and student engagement, as we heard from our general session this morning, even in a remote environment. All right, so the next principle to building remote employee engagement is to build a culture of consistency. And when you are not together every day in the same place, this can be challenging. So one of the things that we realized that we were not doing a good job at is having upfront remote work expectations. And so this year we actually had to revamp our employee onboarding specifically for our certificated staff. because as a fully remote workplace, they were coming in and we realized that we were not getting the level of consistency. And so we sort of had to examine, we had to see what are the key things we really want our new staff to know when they're onboarded, and then we modified our onboarding process. It's also important, if you want consistency, that you have training. And so we as an organization, as I know many schools and the County Office of Education do, rely heavily on surveys and data. We also offer mentorship. So this is an opportunity for our current teaching staff to get some leadership experience by mentoring, and it's volunteer, but they sort of come alongside a new teacher and mentor them in their first year in our school, because as an independent study school, we do things a bit differently than a traditional brick and mortar school would. And a couple examples for you all. Again, hopefully the examples allow you to then think about how you can create consistency in your own setting. Is one, we had beloved training meetings. We call them area groups because at our school, we can serve multiple counties. And so what we would do is we would sort of group up teachers that lived in a certain area, and they would come together once a month in small groups of about 10 to 15, and we would do the training. And so I and the other supervisors, we would actually go each month and visit different of those groups. And one of the things we noticed is there was real inconsistency between the groups because you had so many people leading them. And so we had to change those up. And that was a challenge. Our teachers were not happy about that. And many of the teachers still miss those small area groups. But what we've seen is that the level and quality of training has vastly increased, and the consistency of the training and the consistency of implementing that training has also improved. Another thing we've done to create consistency is colleague data teams. So our teachers will get together with other small groups of teachers, and they will share out data from the students they serve and then sort of bounce ideas off of each other. And this improves consistency because they see what others are doing, and so they know that they're not sort of being an outlier in how they support that student. Okay. Another thing we do is tracking the trend. So when our frontline supervisors hear issues, if they hear it from more than a couple of their teachers, they then write that down in our monthly administrator staff meeting as a trend. And so what we do is we look, and then we'll ask the other supervisors, is this a trend you're seeing? And then we talk about a consistency in our response to make sure that we're telling our teachers and our staff and our students the same message. And then this thing on the right-hand side of the screen is called the decision tree. A couple years ago, our organization, our schools, went through a book called Fierce Conversations. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or gone through it, but this is part of that. And what it's really helped us to do is to at least be consistent in helping our employees to understand the types of issues they can address. And so down at the bottom is root decisions, and these are core decisions that impact the very nature of our business. So these are things that even I, as executive director of academics, would not make decisions on my own. We have a flat leadership in that regard, and so I would work with the department directors from the other departments and our governing boards, stakeholder meetings, et cetera, before we make something that's a root decision. On the other end is the leaf decisions, and these are things that we really want to empower our staff of all levels to make. These are things that they can make and act on their own. They don't need to report back to us. They don't need our approval to do it. And so we spent a lot of time talking with our employees about what kind of decision was that. Well, employee, this was a leaf decision. You really could have made this on your own. Or, well, do you think that might have been a branch decision and you should have checked with your supervisor first or connected with someone? And so while each issue is different, having this consistency in how we address them has helped us as an organization and as schools. All right, our third principle is building two-way communication, and we are going to do another breakout room in just a moment, so be prepared for that. This is a continual process, and you see here there's four ways that we do at IEM Charter Schools two-way communication. And this also comes from that Fierce Communications or Fierce Conversations book. We go into conversations, at least we try, open and willing to learn. One thing as a supervisor that I know is that if I talk to if there's a friction between a parent and a teacher, If I go to the teacher, I'm often going to get a different story than if I go to the parent. And so we try to be open and willing to learn from both of them. The same is true with interdepartmental communication. Okay, we also seek opportunities to listen, share, and learn from each other. I've mentioned that we do our monthly staff town halls that are very interactive. We also have staff meetings on top of that. Again, all of these virtual. We also believe that two-way specific feedback needs to remain open, ongoing, and given in a timely manner. So we want to give feedback immediately if there's an issue. What we don't want to be is one of those schools or organizations that sort of lets things build up. And then when something happens in the future, well, 3 months ago, you did this. No, we want to give the specific feedback right away so that they can learn from it and there can be improvement. And then, of course, always solution oriented. Even in our stakeholder feedbacks, our LCAP survey that we do, we always ask a question something along the lines of, what is a need you see in our school and how do you propose to meet it? Because we feel like it's not enough for us to truly be the type of engaged school and have engaged stakeholders if that just becomes a forum for them to complain. We want to know, how do they propose to solve it so that we can perhaps incorporate that. All right, so the next breakout room here is the question. Angela, if you'd be so kind to write it down. Share ways that your school or your organization does two-way communication. Okay, how do you do two-way communication in this remote environment? Got it? All right, let me put you in breakout rooms here.
This virtual environment, we no longer have, that open door policy. It's harder to set up and maintain, but that she, as a principal, creates opportunities where folks can drop in and just check in with her. So maintaining that open door policy by setting up meetings that don't have agendas. Did I capture that correctly, Jean? Just kind of opportunities to check in?
Yes, that is just the intent of the virtual open door. It is just for myself and my assistant principals to be there and just hang out, is what we refer to it. That's just what we do.
I'm curious, Jean, that sounds similar to what we do with sort of our office hours that we have. But one thing we find is that we don't necessarily get a lot of people to take us up on that. Do you find that there's a lot of response to that?
I would say probably a third of my staff, and I probably have 5. I have a staff about 100, so I would say 5 out of 100 that constantly and consistently stay for the entire period, and it's nice because they are staff members I would never have guested to begin with. So it's nice to build that relationship differently. We do this with our parent group as well, where, it's been called in so many different ways: principals' office hours, morning coffees, if you will. And we walk into those without an agenda either, just a very casual way to have conversations with parents and for them to ask questions, see how families are doing. Because I think sometimes, especially in these last 8 months, there's just maybe too many agendas. It's nice to go in with no agenda and see what happens from there.
Right, that's great. And I was thinking you had mentioned that was some of the staff you would have never guessed. And so I would assume that when we resume in-person instruction, that you will have a connection with those staff that you might not have otherwise.
Yes, that is true. That is absolutely true.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions or comments, I think we can end a bit early, take an extra 5 minutes before our next session starts, which is at 10:40, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, 10:40.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining. I appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.